This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is up on Center Stage, the show about the arts and the artists behind their work. What comes to mind when I mention the actor Chris Sarandon? Well, let's see. His role as the evil Prince Humperdinck in The Princess Bride, perhaps one of the most beloved movies of all time, reaching cult status by people of all ages throughout the years. I didn't think his role was completely evil. In fact, I thought it had a touch of humanity in his misguidedness, but that's Chris Sarandon. And oh, yes, then there's Fright Night, one of the most entertaining films of all time, achieving yet again cult status. Chris Sarandon was beguiling as the vampire Jerry Dandridge, literally the vampire next door, and his beautiful voice being shared in The Nightmare Before Christmas, conceived by the brilliant wunderkind at the time, Tim Burton, a film so clever that it is still considered after 30 years to be one of the most innovative animated films of all time. Another cult status wonder. And I haven't even mentioned his Academy Award nominated turn in Dog Day Afternoon, or his vast theatrical achievements on stage with everyone from Sigourney Weaver to Joel Grey. If you had to invest money in any of his projects, I would say it's a good investment. Everything he does turns to gold and cult status. Just the truth. And that might just include the beautiful concept of his podcast, Cooking by Heart, a show which brings his love of food, love of family, and memory and devotion to celebrity storytellers who, through sharing recipes, reveal who they really are. Well, Chris Sarandon, I love it that you're back. The third time is a charm. It is great to have you on Center Stage, and thank you for taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure, Pamela. Always, always.
So we're coming up to season 3 on this fabulous Cooking by Heart. My God.
Absolutely. Yeah. It just has sort of whizzed by. I don't know how this happened, but suddenly I've done, I think I'm coming up on 50 shows, and we have had a wonderful time doing literally, I can't think of one episode that I haven't personally enjoyed tremendously. And I'm obviously always hope that the folks who tune into the podcast do as well.
You can see that in your work. And I was there in Fairfield when you were live on stage with the food specialist and enthusiast and author and restaurateur Alice Waters. And you were amazing. It
Oh,
was
well,
like we were sitting in your living room and you're talking to one of the greatest ladies of all time in food. You're a warm guest. You're a
thank
warm
you.
host, I've got to
Thank
say.
you. Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed Alice very much. I admire so extraordinary. I'm going to go back. I admire so much her work over the years, obviously with this extraordinary restaurant that she created, Chez Panisse, in Berkeley, California, but also in her uh, becoming the kind of the mother of the farm to table movement in this country, by virtue of her spending time in France and experiencing the way the French use food in the restaurant business, not just as something that you sit down and eat, but also an experience that comes from where the food comes from.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
about where the food comes from as well. And her work in seasonal cooking specifically, that is the Chez Panisse almost exclusively works with food that is in season because, and this is something else that she's pioneered, not only in season, but also locality, that is the food being local. And also this extraordinary program that she created in which she has managed to install gardens in over 6,500 schools worldwide, which is just an accomplishment beyond belief, really.
And really, Chris, this factors into our world in these times, doesn't it?
Yeah,
We need to be thinking about food, about
absolutely.
water, about feeding everyone.
Yes. Yeah.
And you talk
Sustainability.
exactly, and you talk about the locality of the foods that she honors. And when I see you on Instagram in your own garden,
Mhm.
caressing your beautiful vegetables, and you seem to delight in just the visceral and organic quality of growing things.
It's been such an important part of my life. Um, I started gardening when I was in my, I guess, late 20s. We were at the time living in Westchester County near the actress Colleen Dewhurst. I had worked with Colleen in a play, and we would visit her often, and we ultimately bought a small house near her. And she had a couple of gentlemen working for her who lived near her, and one of them was an inveterate gardener, had been gardening all of his life. And I just thought I'm attracted to this in so many different ways. The freshness of the food, the actual act of seeing something grow from a seed to something that you're sitting at the table eating. And I basically just looked over his shoulder for a couple of summers, and it's been part of my life ever since.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
And here you're coming completely full circle again. I think we've spoken about this before because you literally grew up with parents who ran a restaurant
Yes.
in West Virginia. I mean,
Yeah,
this is part of
my
your life.
dad, a Greek immigrant who came here in the 1920s with nothing, literally, and worked his way up to a point where he could buy a little restaurant of his own. Then he brought everybody over from the family, his brothers, his two of his sisters, and they worked together in the restaurant. And I worked there from the time I was 9 years old
Mhm.
until I went away to college. And it's interesting to me because part of the impetus for cooking by heart has to do with not just the fact that I worked in the restaurant from when I was a kid and trying to help my guests associate that time in their lives and their experiences with food, but also the fact that it is so much a part of my DNA. My both my grandfathers, one of them had a little coffee shop, the other had a small restaurant, and later a sidewalk stand or a food purveying stand. And I have a son who's a trained chef. Both of my daughters are great cooks. My wife is an amazing cook, Joanna Gleason, an amazing cook, and we share a lot of time in the kitchen. And we essentially cook almost every night of the week.
That's
We don't
extraordinary.
eat out a lot. We don't order in a lot. And it has become so much a part of the fabric of my life that I don't know where I'd be without it, quite frankly.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
So when did you decide to move to Connecticut? I believe you bought a farm, and where you do raise all of your you have your
Well, we
pets.
didn't buy a farm per se, but we certainly have dedicated a good part of the property to my garden in the backyard, and also raising trees and apples and fruit
Okay.
as well. Um, but it came about because at the time Joanna and I were living in Los Angeles. We had both been in New York. We had been in a play together in New York, a musical that was one of the biggest flops in Broadway history. We may talk about this at some point. You mentioned it earlier in our conversation before we went on the air. And when we moved to California, and then when we decided to move back, Joanna had gotten a Broadway show. I had gotten a Broadway show. And so we had been renting our house in Los Angeles and thought this is crazy. We sold our house and we needed to reinvest the money in the sale of the house. And it made no sense to buy an apartment in New York City because the prices were ridiculous.
Hmm.
And for what we could buy a one-bedroom apartment in New York, we spent on a fixer-up house in Connecticut. Um, and we looked at, oh gosh, we probably looked at 40 or 50 houses. And for some reason, this house that we're in now, it was in disrepair, to put it mildly. And and but there was something about it that spoke to us about its future, about what it could be, and also what the property could be. And so that's what we did. We just, said, what the hell, full of damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. And we bought this house, and over the years, we have, get a job, do a room, get a job, plant a few trees. and the accumulated uh, um, working capital has been converted into living capital, which is what we enjoy so much.
I think we all can relate to that. Get a job in the performing arts, get a
Yeah.
job, and then we can put on that new deck if we want to
Yeah,
on the house.
yeah, exactly.
And with you, you're literally growing things. I mean, Chris, I feel that this is so important at this junction in our lives. Coming out of COVID, you and I spoke several times during COVID.
Hmm.
We've come out of it. We've come out into uncertain times,
Yes.
and chaos. And I recently did a show on recollection and remembrance and why many of us go back to watching old movies we love, old
Ah,
TV series we can relate to.
yeah.
And really, it's because it gives us a feeling of safety and connection.
Yes.
I can't help but feel that you have had that impetus in building Cooking by Heart. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The universal impulse to gather with people and over food share memories and family experiences and um, friendships and love. So much of it takes place in every culture over food. It certainly was the case in my growing up, in my father's restaurant and at home with my family, with my mother and my dad and all the relatives who lived nearby,
Mhm.
and friends who would come from sometimes, great distances just to sit down at a meal.
Right, right. What a beautiful gathering. I love
Yeah.
it. And you're right, the sharing of stories, the deep connection. And with you, I believe you have 9 grandchildren.
Yep.
And everyone is always coming to the table, literally.
Yes, yes, we get together as often as we can. We live close enough so that we can see each other relatively frequently, but far enough so that we don't see each other all the time. So it the distance, which is not great, but it's still there, it provides even more of a pull for us to want to get together. And when we do, we all cook. My kids cook. We encourage the grandchildren to help us always when we're having food with the little ones. One or two of them will always, be up on a stool around the kitchen counter, wanting to crack an egg or use the hand, the whisk, breaking up the eggs in the recipe, or if it's something else, decorating something or creating something that is culinary.
Mhm.
Um, and it provides a wonderful kind of glue in the family.
To the experience. I love
Yeah.
it. Well, let's talk about the current season of Cooking by Heart. You've
Yeah.
started with Rosanna Arquette.
Hmm.
Wow. So, what
Rosanna
did
was my
she
first
bring
guest.
to the table?
Well, a fascinating, fascinating life when she started out. First of all, both of her parents were actors, and her siblings have all become actors over the
Absolutely.
years. They're
Hmm.
all fairly well known, or very well known. And Rosanna uh, describes, in fact, um, her early experiences of food were first class uh, takeout. Uh, there was always a lot of first class fast food in her house. There wasn't a lot of cooking because both of her parents worked, and her relationship with food was very sort of tangential until she got a little bit older. Then her parents moved to a commune or created a commune. So there was communal food, which was not great in the culinary end of things, but was wonderful in the sense that there was community, a lot of people together sitting and eating food. But then when she left, she became a self-taught cook, and concurrently was discovered at a very young age in Hollywood when she was like 17 years old. So she tells great stories about, first of all, growing up in that family, and also her culinary awakenings, how she started discovering how to put things together for herself, some of the things she does even today when she and her siblings get together and cook. Um, Also stories about some of the experiences she's had while shooting films, and some of the unfortunate ones, including her well-documented brush with the Me Too movement and Harvey Weinstein and that situation. So she's a very candid and a very interesting conversationalist, and a fabulous woman who's lived a great life.
How fascinating. I love it. What a start
Yeah.
to even include the Harvey Weinstein kind of perspective into this. This is
Mhm.
incredible. Incredible. So Chris Sarandon, tell me how you have changed over the past three seasons. I mean, and this one that has just started, in your regard to many of the celebrities you've known in your work, many who you've worked with, and their stories through food and recollection. How has that affected you now than in comparatively to when you first started cooking by heart?
Well, I think originally when I started doing it, it was as you mentioned during the pandemic, and every actor I knew was languishing, right? And my brother-in-law, who was a great podcast fan and who was also a television writer, producer, has been working for a number of years on very lots of great, uh, mostly network, but sometimes cable television. And he suggested I do a podcast because we were basically sitting around. And I said, well, what am I going to do a podcast about? And he said, come on. You grew up in a restaurant. You're Greek. You cook for us all the time. Do it about food. And I came up with the idea of my entry into to the to the vast number of food shows was more unique to me, and that is I grew up around it. So
Right.
what was it like for you, my guest, right? So from the beginning, I started talking to people about it, and I I continued from the very beginning to be surprised by people's experiences because they were, on the one hand, very different from mine, but on the other hand, so universal. That is, I'll contrast a couple of the early shows, for instance. I did an early show, one of my first shows, with a wonderful author and raconteur and now podcaster, an amazing woman named Adriana Trajani,
Mhm.
who's written a number of novels. And Adri's life was similar to mine in that we both grew up in Appalachia. She started in an earlier in her younger years in another location, and then she moved from Pennsylvania to Virginia and a coal mining community and that was my upbringing as well. I grew up in a coal mining community, but in a big Italian family where everything was food, 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 colorful, wonderful cooks. The women, of course, were the great cooks. The men sometimes cooked and picking their food fresh, et cetera, et cetera. And I think one of maybe my second guest was Michael Patrick King. Michael, who was one of the creators of Sex and the City and
Yes.
is the current showrunner on the sequel that's on HBO. And Michael's experience was horrible in the culinary part of his life because his mother was a terrible cook. She was very unhappy. There was lots of friction in the family. And yet the stories were just as rich, but in a different way. I mean, Michael described,
Mm.
for instance, that the only time there was flavor in the food in his house was when his mother cried in the mashed potatoes. So, so while the culinary richness was of a different sort, it was still rich.
Hmm.
And that's what surprised me. I wasn't prepared quite for that. I was
Oh.
and have been, by the way, all the way through the first season, the second season, where I get a lot of stories from people who, particularly during certain epochs of our history or certain periods of our history where women were subjugated to the home, where they were expected to be homemakers, take care of the children. There were stories of a lot of unhappy mothers
Yeah.
who were bright and motivated and wanted to be out in the world, but were constrained by whatever was going on in the culture. Okay.
Right.
Sometimes they turned into wonderful cooks, and sometimes they turned into, um, um, to use a taste phrase, bitter cooks.
Right. Right.
But their stories were still very rich for their variety and for their efforts to create for their families a rich life, be it through food or through some other way. And so I don't think I was quite prepared for
Yeah.
the variety of stories. And also the fact that while a lot of the stories lacked details of great sort of culinary triumph, there were triumphs in other uh, areas of people's lives, particularly the women. Um, and that was just as important because the show is not just about the food, as you say, it's about the people in the stories.
That's right. It is. And
Yeah,
about what comes forth. It's almost like therapy, Chris.
yeah. Oh,
And
absolutely.
I would think there would be times where you would be doing a show and you close your computer and just sit back and sigh and think, wow, I mean,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I am overwhelmed. I am
Oh,
overcome
so many times.
with the passion.
So many times. Yeah.
Look what you have opened up.
In me and hopefully for my audience.
Oh, there's no question about it.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. You seem so eased at being in the podcaster's chair. Did you feel in the beginning that this needed to be worked at? I mean, you're an actor. You've accomplished so many great things in your life. You have so much finesse. Was it difficult in the beginning and even in now, interviewing people and trying to find that part of themselves where you feel you can develop trust, let's say?
Well, what I've tried to do, and with, I think, some success, is to balance listening, very particularly listening with to my guests, with relating what we have in common, because in a way, I'm the conduit to the audience.
That's right.
And the audience needs to know that somebody else has had that same experience that my guest has had. Sometimes I have had that experience. And I will say, oh, God, yeah, it was like that for me too. Or I remember this particular food that my mom prepared that was similar to the one that
Mhm.
you're talking about, that your mother or your father prepared, or that we had in my dad's restaurant. Um, because I think that gives the audience an entree into how they can relate in the same way. I'm hoping that they're sitting there going, oh, yeah, that happened to me too when I was around. We had those same conversations when we were sitting around the table. Or I knew a family that was like that because we never talked at the table. Sometimes it was
Exactly.
that.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, so to me, it's as much about it's much more about the guest and about listening, but also about trying to provide enough of myself that an audience can identify.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. There's
yeah,
the trust.
yeah.
And that would be my next question. How far do you feel you can go, with a guest? I mean, I suppose you're trying to be empathetic along the way and really feel, what the perspective is from that person. And of course, the temperature in the room,
Absolutely. It depends on I mean, you have to be very much, as an actor does, you have to be very much in the moment. You can't be thinking about what you're going to be asking next, which is another thing that I've learned is don't prepare so much. That you have
oh,
to sort of follow where things lead you. And it's important to have research and to know about the person that you're talking to. On the one hand, but on the other hand, if the person leads you somewhere, then you have to be willing to follow. and follow in an empathic way, so that they're comfortable enough to go further.
Yeah.
And some of the things that people have told me have been quite extraordinary.
Yeah. And precious.
Yeah,
To be handled deftly.
yeah.
Who do you have on the outside helping you along the way? Do you have mentors, advisors? Is the wonderful Joanna Gleason back there saying,
Absolutely.
Chris, I think you should have gone this direction?
Yes, Joanna has been from day one my the voice that I want to hear, and she's helped me guide it very much so, particularly with the live shows, because in the beginning, the live shows were I was awkward. It was tough, and I sort of found my way through it. I was very nervous. I hadn't appeared on stage in a number of years.
Hmm.
So that when I did, I think my first live show was with Adriana Trajani, but she's so outgoing that it was very easy.
With
Um,
every guest. Yeah. Hmm.
but then I had a couple of guests who were a little more reticent, and also the whole idea of introducing myself to the audience, to a live audience, very
Hmm.
different from sitting in
Hmm.
front of a mic. I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience as well.
Yes. Yes.
So I had to find my way with that too, and it's gotten easier as time has gone along, and yet at the same time, I'm still very critical of myself and what did I do and what I like. There's one show that I did this year where I finished and I went, why didn't I get into that? She was talking about this particular thing and I wanted to follow it up, and for some reason, my brain was somewhere else.
Hmm.
I'd been on a red eye the night before, so I had something of an excuse, but it was not enough of an excuse. I
Hmm.
should have been able to follow that line. So it's, and it's like being in a play in a way. You
Hmm.
know there's a script, but the audience changes things, and in this case, the guest changes things.
That's right. That's right. I think one of the difficulties there too, when you're on stage, when you're doing a play or any kind of performance, you're reaching out and connecting with the audience.
Yes.
When you're interviewing a guest and you're really responsible for that energy, that's a
Yeah.
completely different dynamic.
Oh,
And you can't play off the audience, you're playing off that guest. Like you say, the most important thing, the element is listening. And
mm.
that's any great actor, isn't it? I mean, of course, you were in that league, and it's very exciting to see what you're doing. And I have to say, when I came to see you interview Alice Waters, I felt like I was literally sitting in your living room. I felt a general ease, which I appreciated. And yeah, there was no friction, there was no fear that I felt it was just very comfortable, and you just allowed her to speak and unfold. I loved it.
Yeah, and she's really quite an extraordinary woman.
Well, what else have we got to look forward to this
Well,
season?
so far on season three, aside from um, Roseanne Rosanna Arquette, my next guest, actually, the next guest launched today, a young, relatively young man. I'm calling him young because he's a hell of a lot younger than I am. Michael Urie.
Hmm.
Michael is currently starring on Broadway in Once Upon a Mattress.
Hmm.
He was also in a number of other Broadway shows. He was in the revival of Spamalot, but Michael also was starring in the television series Ugly Betty. He's been in a number of films. He's in this streaming show called Shrinking. Michael's everywhere, right? He's also one of the most delightful human beings you will ever come across in your life. A brilliant actor. I don't know if you saw a show called Buyer and Seller
Oh yeah. Hmm.
about the young man who's hired by Barbara Streisand to curate her little whatever you want to call it, her little mini mall in her basement.
Right. Right.
Uh, Written by a friend of ours, Jonathan Tollins,
Hmm.
who lives up here in Connecticut as well. And Michael did that. It really put him on the map. He won every off-Broadway award. He was just deliciously
Hmm.
amazing in the show. And he's a deliciously amazing guest. And I don't even only mean that in the culinary way. He talks about his mom and her cooking, what a wonderful eclectic cook his mother was, and how he tries to recreate her recipes but can't. He says, I completely screw them up. He sent me a couple of recipes from his mother, including some recipes his mom illustrated with magazine photographs of the particular canned goods that were used in it. I mean, it was a great, funny, wonderful conversation. I also, in a subsequent episode, I think it's a couple of weeks after that, spoke with Ileana Douglas, actress, a fascinating woman, author as well.
Right.
I met Ileana, in fact, at the Sacred Heart University Theater, where she was doing a talk back with Susan Granger about her experiences in the movies. And also, she's written a book about filmmaking in Connecticut because she is a Connecticut native and has moved back to Connecticut. And some extraordinary stories, including one about a meal that she had with Marty Scorsese and Marlon Brando. That's just amazing.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary story. Victor Garber is one of my
Oh,
guests.
wonderful.
Victor, who was a longtime regular on the television show Alias. I think a lot of folks out there would know him from his role in the film Titanic.
That's right.
A big Broadway presence as well. A chef, a James Beard winning chef from West Virginia, my home state.
Ah, look at that.
Yeah, named Chef Paul Smith, who's a lovely man, wonderful man. A woman named Bonnie Hammer. Bonnie was the former vice chairman of NBC Universal and an old friend of Joanna's and mine, who came on the show and tells great stories about how she worked her way through the glass ceiling. My computer's making lots of noise. How Bonnie worked her way through the glass ceiling to become one of she was considered the queen of cable television for
Mm-hmm.
many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think of who else. Jill Eikenberry, the actress,
Oh, yeah.
wonderful actress from LA Law, also any number of
Oh,
other
yes. Oh, my gosh.
fabulous roles on Broadway as well as on television. So that's just the beginning.
What a cross
The beginning
section.
of the season, and we're moving on to. I'm going to have a big name chef at a live show at the SHU Theater. I can't tell you who yet
Okay.
because we still, pardon me, we still have to cement that date. And I'm talking to a couple of authors, so we're going to have an interesting season this year.
Wow. So how do you record these, Chris? I mean, do you work on these over the summer and then release them? Is this, an ongoing process for you? How does this work and how do you book your guests?
Well, I'm the director, producer, booker. Because a lot of these people I've either know or know people who know. And I feel better for me to actually make the overture
Hmm.
for the guest rather than it's coming from a third party.
Right.
So I also have a wonderful PR gentleman named Ed Katz,
Yep.
who does a lot of sort of, liaisoning for particularly media folks like you, newspapers, television, that sort of thing. And then I also have a couple of people, wonderful people who do social media and my website. I have a website, chrissarandon.com, where all the episodes of the podcast emanate from, or can emanate from. You just go to the website, chrissarandon.com. They're all there. Um, and so it's a team, uh, but I'm sort of at the center of the madness
Hmm.
in a way.
Hmm.
Oh, and I also have a great sound engineer and video engineer.
Oh, well, there you
I
are. I
mean,
mean, you're set.
yeah, who's great at this, and he works with me very specifically on each episode. But
That's
as far as
fantastic.
the episodes themselves, I just do a lot of research.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand that.
I do a lot of reading. If it's an author, for Adria, I read 3 books, 4 books. Read 4 of Alice Waters' books. Jacques Pepin, same thing.
Hmm.
His memoir, Lydia Bastianich. You name it.
It's
You
fantastic.
know the story, yes.
I do know the story.
You do your
And
homework.
and sometimes when you don't have time to do the homework, you just get a hit off of a guest in a
Hmm.
direction you want to go.
Hmm.
And if you're really listening, they
Yeah,
will lead you. There's no question about it. There have
yeah,
been times I've been sitting with a script of 10 pages and I haven't asked one question off of it, even
yes,
though I've done the research,
yes, yes,
because
absolutely.
you know what we're talking, like you and I are doing right now.
Yeah.
And it all
Joanna very much encouraged me in that regard. You know, she was the one who was saying to me, I know you've got all this stuff and you've got all this research, you've got all this background, but once something starts going somewhere, just follow it. Uh, worry
and
about where
how.
it is. Yeah,
You're doing okay.
yeah.
Well, let's talk about Joanna because we never really have on any of our conversations.
Mhm.
And I guess my first question to you is because I know you've been married several times, but is Joanna Gleason, does she complete you or is she back there inspiring you on a daily basis? But I think I already know the answer to that one.
She's everything. How
I
about that?
love it.
Yeah, yeah.
I
She is,
see it in every photo of the two of you together,
yeah,
the
she's
both
an
of you.
extraordinary woman in so many ways. She's I think one of the great actresses of her generation, if not ever, in this country. She is a prolific writer who wrote and directed a screenplay that she wrote that is actually going to be distributed probably in the next few months. A
Exciting.
wonderful movie called The Grotto that she wrote and directed. She's also writing a memoir, uh, and she and I, you know, we do this life together. That's just, I mean, it's hard to describe, except that it's a wonderful life,
It is
as
a
Frank
wonderful
Capra
life.
would say. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, and you're
Uh,
figuring it out as you go along. I love that kind of
yeah,
spontaneity.
yeah.
And
And we,
she's actually the daughter of Monty Hall from
correct.
Let's
Yes.
Make a Deal. I did not know this
Yeah, yeah.
about your wonderful,
Yes.
wonderful
And
life.
I was lucky enough to become part of that wonderful family of hers. I knew Monty and his wife Marilyn uh, infinitely well because Joanna and I were together for a long time before they passed, I think 4 or 5 years ago. Um, and became very close to them because both of my parents were gone, and they really became sort of my second mom and dad
Yeah.
for many, many years. Not
Oh,
my mother and father-in-law, but my mom and dad, as well as her siblings. She has a brother and a sister. And we met under the worst possible circumstances. That is, Joanna and I did, because we were doing a Broadway show that was at the time the most expensive Broadway musical in history, and called Nick and Nora, based on the Thin Man movies,
hmm.
directed by the 500-pound gorilla known as Arthur Lawrence,
Ah,
who wrote the book to Gypsy, wrote the screenplay to The Way We
West Side
Were,
Story.
was the frequent collaborator to any number of great artists,
Yeah,
including Jerome Robbins and Stephen Sondheim.
of
And
course.
Arthur was he was a tough cookie. I'm putting it mildly, and and he wrote the book to Nick and Nora. The music was written by Charles Strauss from Annie and Bye Bye Birdie. Richard Maltby, the great Richard Maltby, the lyricist, um,
Wow.
and and it had um, a big hit written all over it, except for the fact of Arthur's hubris, in the sense that Arthur was not listening to anyone. And so the show, I mean, and a cast of luminaries, um, Faith Prince, um, Barry Bostwick,
Oh my gosh.
um, trying to think of who else. I know I've forgotten someone, but anyway, Deborah Monk, a lot of wonderful, wonderful Broadway people. And the show was a huge, huge, huge flop, universally panned by every critic in New York.
Oh my gosh.
And in the midst of all this, I was going through some financial problems that had nothing to do with Joanna. and some marital problems from a previous relationship. And Joanna and I met, and it happened,
Mm-hmm.
and it had every possibility of being a showmance. And here we are, more than 30 years later, married for most of those years, and blissfully happy and living the life, the great life. So,
You must have had so many high hopes for Nick and Nora. I mean, talk
oh,
about the Thin Man,
yeah.
William Powell, Myrna Loy, Asta. I mean, this would be a winner in anyone's eyes. I'm so sorry it was so heavily laden
Oh,
by the wrong kind of energy.
wrong kind of energy. That's a good way of putting it. The chemistry was bad. Oh, and Christine Baranski. That's who
Oh
else.
my gosh.
So
Oh my gosh.
it was an amazing cast. And we're all still friends, by the way, whenever we see each other, because when you go through disaster, sometimes it's more bonding than
That's right.
going through something that's a big hit.
Yeah, the scars are still there. It's unforgettable.
Oh
That's
boy.
such a pity. I'm such a Nick and Nora fan. In
Mm.
fact, I had a landmark birthday where we had a Nick and Nora theme and Eve right down to the cocktail, and we
Oh,
loved every moment of it. There you
wow.
go. So I'm
Uh-huh.
so sorry about that, but
Yeah.
the
Well,
they're the
I
winner.
think one of the problems was trying to recreate that kind
Yeah,
of atmosphere
yeah.
and something that's so indelible in people's minds. And
Which is
unless you
almost impossible.
approach it from a different angle, you're almost asking for it.
But you were the winner with Joanna Gleason. That is so
Absolutely.
exciting, Chris. Well, look, I just because it's October and
Yep.
it is the month and Halloween is coming up,
Yep.
I just had to sit down last night and watch Fright Night. What a crazy joy. But I've just got to say, as clever as this film was, and I know it was one of Tom Holland's first outings, I mean, and it was so nifty in so many ways. You walk into the screen and you just light up the camera. And I've got to say that dance scene in the nightclub when you walked in,
Thank you.
wow. I mean, I can see every I can see Angel in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I can see Edward Cullen in Twilight, The Lost Boys. It seems like everything came out of that one scene
Mm.
where you were so seductive. And I've got to say, you really added something special to that film. My gosh.
Well, thank you.
How
Thank you.
did
And
that?
I owe a lot to Tom Holland, the
Mm,
director, who guided me in that direction. That he encouraged me to find that side of myself.
interesting.
And I think we were largely successful.
Is he how you came to that project? Was it through
Yeah,
him?
yeah. I was at the time, I'd just come off of having done, not just, but I had been, I'd gotten the Oscar nomination for Dog Day Afternoon. I'd worked a lot I'd made a number of big Hollywood movies. I had done two or three Hallmark Hall of Fame adaptations of, I'd done You Can't Go Home Again, The Tale of Two Cities, playing the lead roles in those. And I was pretty full of myself, quite frankly. And and I got this script called Fright Night. And I looked at the title page and I went, I can't do a movie called Fright Night. I'm a very highly regarded actor in the classical as well as in the contemporary field, and 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 I can't sully my name by associating myself with a movie called Fright Night. But I always felt, and I still do, that when you're offered something, you owe it to the people who've made the offer to read it.
Hmm.
So I sat down and started to read it, and within 10 minutes, I was completely absorbed and captivated by, first of all, the plot, the beautifully plotted, cleverly written. And when I finished it, I thought, well, what harm could it do? I'll go meet the director, right? So I told him, look, I'm kind of interested. I'm not saying I'm doing it. Don't get me wrong, because I'm a very, very high class actor, but but I'll come out and I'll meet with you guys. So they flew me out, bless them, and to meet with Tom Holland and Herb Jaffe, the producer. And we sat down and started talking. And then Tom literally described the way he was going to shoot the movie from the first shot to the end of the movie.
Wow.
He described the whole thing to me of how he was going to approach it, how he was going to do it. And when he finished, I thought, well, this guy really knows what he's doing. Number one, it's a great script. Number two, it's a great character. Number three, I'm stupid not to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did. And first of all, it was a wonderful personal experience because the cast was delightful, including Roddy McDowall,
Oh, he's
whom
amazing.
I
He's
got
amazing.
I got to spend lots of time with and became a close friend with.
Mm-hmm.
And he had previously been a friend of Joanna's because they'd done a tour together. So we became as a couple friends, and we were invited often to his very famous Hollywood sit-down dinners with, you can't believe the people he would have to
Oh my
dinner.
gosh.
But also the rest of the cast, most of whom were young, very young. We just got along great, and we still are very close friends, all of us. We've all gotten older, obviously. In fact, I'm seeing them all this weekend. We're all doing a convention together, an autograph
That
convention together.
is extraordinary. Did
Yeah.
you ever think that this film would take off like it did in cult status?
No, no. But one never does have that sense.
No,
Things get discovered, and they have they get a life of their own. It's like The Princess Bride. Same
that's
thing.
right.
It started off with a whimper, and it's become, part of the culture. And the same thing with the Nightmare Before Christmas, which is
That's
now
right.
taken over Halloween. Those characters are now, that's Halloween.
That's indelible in
Yeah.
our culture. You see, I said in the beginning, you're a good investment. Anything you're going to do is cult status. And
Well,
you know,
yes, you tend to forget if you look at my filmography, the vast number of movies that I did that were not cult favorites. So don't totally exaggerate my effect on, yeah,
but it
movie
does
going
help
public.
that you are remembered in this way, Chris Sarandon. I mean, my gosh, what a life's work. You know, I've just for fun,
Sure.
because I've kept you long here, and I know you've got important things to do,
Oh,
but just for fun.
nothing more important than you.
Okay, thank you. So, because we're talking about food and you, getting to the table and embracing people as you do, let's say, let's say I can wave my magic wand, and I can allow you to have dinner with anyone who has passed this earth. This does not have to be anyone famous, but it can be anyone. Can you think of who you would want to dine with and why?
That's the question I would have loved to have had a couple of days ago.
Okay, I'll remember that for next time.
But now it's got to be off the cuff, right? Okay.
You got it.
Well, I think it would be certainly some film luminaries like, um, I mean, Frank Capra, uh, Michael Powell,
Oh, yes, please.
um, um, golly, Socrates, um,
I can just imagine what that
you
dinner
know,
would be.
somebody like one of the great, I'm a big fan of historical fiction, and being a
Mhm.
Greek, some of my
That's
loves
right.
are, they have to do with, there are a series of books that a wonderful author named Mary Renault wrote called The King Must Die and the Bull from the Sea,
Yes.
about the Theseus the legend, and they're brilliantly written. I'd sit down with Mary Renault in a moment. Um, Patrick O'Brien, the great
Mm.
writer who wrote the Aubrey Maturin 21 sea novel series of novels that are just
Oh
an
my God.
extraordinary canon of great literary works, not just historical novels. Um, oh,
This is
whew,
going to be a very large table,
a large
Chris.
table. Yeah, yeah. Of course, him, because I played him once, Jesus.
That's right.
Because I'd
You
like
did.
to know what the real guy was like.
That's
I
interesting.
would really like to. I played him in a CBS special
That's
called "The
right.
Day Christ Died," which was essentially about the political world at the time of of Jesus' crucifixion. The Buddha, why not?
I think
And
we've covered all the bases here.
let's put Muhammad in there.
Why not?
If you're giving me, whomever.
Wow.
Um,
Do you realize all the culinary things we have to think about now, feeding all of these
all these people. Oh,
people?
yeah. Right. Well, we've got a kind of Middle Eastern strain running through there with
There
Muhammad
you
and
go.
Jesus,
Hmm.
and Eastern with the Buddha. And we have some more contemporary culinary strains that we can offer up at the table. It'll be potluck, We'll ask them to bring something.
I love that.
Yeah.
That would be the best.
Okay. Yeah. Come as you are.
I love that. I've never had this kind of answer. I've asked this question, and some of my guests have been reduced to tears
Really?
because they want to be with their father or who
Um,
they've lost, or a family
but I was
member.
with them.
It's
I knew them. I'm really more interested in, I love my parents and I love my
yeah,
sibling who passed away, but I spend a lot of time with them. I
especially around the table. So
I've
yeah,
never
let's get
spent
on
any
to
time with
something
any
new.
of these people around the table. Howard Hawks, I'd add Howard Hawks too, for a kind of macho, great sort of American, movie
Well,
director. Oh,
you could find what it was really like to work with John Wayne and Katharine Hepburn. I mean, it would be
oh,
fantastic.
I actually I've got another guest coming up, Peter McRae, Joel McRae's son.
Oh wow.
Who also, Joel McRae was married to Frances. Oh, I've forgotten her name at the moment. It's called proper name syndrome. Uh, and at any rate,
I'll look that up.
Peter talks a lot about growing up in Hollywood when his father was a big movie star, and they owned a ranch out in what is now greater downtown LA, but
Hmm.
at the time was farmland. And his father had a ranch, and literally the people who were knocking at the door to come and visit were Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, Gary Cooper. He tells extraordinary stories about those days.
Oh,
Yeah,
Chris,
I'm going
how
to try to do a little series of
thrilling.
the children of who grew up with what we consider to be the great movies. And
I love that. That's
yeah,
a fantastic idea.
yeah.
Man, oh man, you're not just a pretty face or a great vampire. You've got so much more to offer.
Well,
Mm, mm,
let's put it
mm.
that I'm not just an older face.
No, you're not.
No.
No, you're not. No, there's a lot of wisdom there and a lot more to share.
Uh-huh.
There you
Uh-huh.
go.
From your mouth, as they say.
I'm glad to be a part of it. Oh my God. Well, I think my show is about the artist's journey, and so is yours. And in the most extraordinary way, you're bringing people together to share that, and just everything we've touched on has been extraordinary today. I mean, wow, if you're talking about that kind of depth, in these interviews with people, uh, using food as that sensory
And it really,
unleashing element.
and the greatest moments for me are always when somebody says, I hadn't thought about this in years.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean.
I just
Wow.
remembered that this was one of the things that I remember.
Isn't that
I
something?
haven't thought about it in a long time. Just to be able to be the conduit for that it makes it all worth it.
It's like when they open up a hope chest they haven't looked in for so many
Yeah,
years.
yeah,
And it just floods over them. How,
yeah, yeah.
Chris, oh my God, now you're going to
Yes.
make me cry. What you're doing is so special, and
Well,
good
thank
luck
you.
to you for this series and many, many more. And I'm still waiting to hear the name Chris Walken. So I don't know, maybe you could do an onstage thing.
Oh,
You could
well,
hoof a little bit.
I did a play with Chris.
Ah, yes, sir.
We
Yes, I did.
closed, we closed, literally closed the Connecticut Shakespeare Festival.
I love that.
Yeah,
But remember, he was also from a family of bakers, I think.
yeah.
I mean, he was also in food.
Hmm.
So, there
I
is a
haven't thought about that in a long time. I haven't thought of Chris in a long time. Thank you for mentioning him. I'm
you're-
going to try to find him.
oh my God. Well, to everybody listening, I I've got to encourage everyone to go back in your memory about food, about sharing, about all the
Yes,
things
do.
that Chris Sarandon is laying the table for, literally, not to make
Oh,
such
thank
an
you.
obvious pun. But Chris, it's always a delight. And I'm sure I'm going to close the show and think, oh no, why didn't I ask him? And that'll come next time. Okay.
Okay. All right. All right.
Well, to everybody out there, please visit Fright Night in Halloween because you will be gobsmacked, as the English say, about this very seductive vampire and Chris Sarandon, all his heart and soul, all of Joanna Gleason's heart and soul, everything he's bringing to us around the table. Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your having me and just encourage people to come and listen to some of the episodes of Cooking by Heart. Go to chrissarandon.com.
That's
You'll
it.
find them very easy either to watch or to listen to.
And are you still selling aprons?
I haven't been selling aprons. I've been it's like offering them as certain, little gifts and things to people.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right. I'll look out for that. Can't
yeah.
wait.
Okay.
Can't wait for the next on stage. And to everyone out there, please visit centerstagewithpamelakuhn.com for more shows like this, always on the arts and the riches of life, as we've heard about, wow, today. Chris Sarandon, thank you so much for being with me again. It has been such a pleasure.
And my pleasure too. Thank you, Pamela.
So glad to hear it.
Bye-bye.
And to all my guests, stay safe out there. This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is now down on Center Stage.